Right now, without saying a single word, you are communicating. The way you are sitting, the expression on your face, the direction your eyes are pointing. All of it is broadcasting information to anyone watching, and you are doing most of it without thinking. This is not a modern skill. This is not something you learned. It is something you inherited from ancestors who had no other option. Because for most of human evolutionary history, there were no words, no sentences, no language, no names for things, no way to say what you meant with sound that carried meaning. And yet somehow, our ancestors survived. They coordinated hunts. They raised children. They navigated complex social groups. They communicated danger, affection, intention, and warning, all without a single word. How? That question has a surprisingly rich answer, and parts of it are still visible in your own behavior right now. That is what this is about. Before we talk about what came before language, we need to understand how recent language actually is. Modern human language, the kind with grammar, syntax, and the ability to describe things that are not present or have not happened yet, is estimated to have emerged somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago. Homo sapiens has existed for around 300,000 years. Our genus Homo goes back roughly 2.5 million years. That means for the overwhelming majority of hominin evolutionary history, for millions of years, our ancestors were getting along without what we would recognize as language. They were not silent. They were not uncommunicating. They were doing something effective enough to enable survival, cooperation, and social complexity in groups. What were they doing? The oldest form of communication available to our ancestors was the body itself, not words, not sounds. The face, the posture, the gaze. Facial expression is so ancient as a communication system that it predates hominins entirely. The basic emotional expressions, fear, anger, disgust, surprise, happiness, sadness, are not culturally learned. They are biological. They appear in infants who have never seen them modeled. They appear in identical form across cultures that have had no contact with each other. They appear in our closest primate relatives. When a chimpanzee pulls its lips back in a fear grimace, it is using the same underlying muscle groups, driven by the same neural circuits that produce expressions on your face right now. This is a communication system at least tens of millions of years old. For our hominin ancestors, the face was the primary broadcast channel. Fear could be communicated before a threat was visible to others. Anger could be signaled before it escalated to violence. Affection could be expressed in ways that built the social bonds that held groups together. The human face has more muscles dedicated to expression than any other animal. That did not happen by accident. It evolved because communicating with the face was essential to survival. Posture and body language followed the same logic. The way a body is oriented tells others whether you are threat or welcome, dominant or submissive, calm or alarmed, all without a single voluntary decision. Alongside the body, our ancestors were making sounds, just not words. There is an important distinction here. A chimpanzee alarm call is not a word for predator. It is an involuntary emotional response to a predator that happens to carry information. The animal is not choosing to communicate a concept. It is reacting, and the reaction is useful to others. Our ancestors had this. They also had something more. The gradual development of more voluntary, more controlled vocalization, as the infrastructure for speech slowly evolved over millions of years. The descended larynx, the expanded language areas of the brain, the fine motor control of the tongue and lips. None of these appeared overnight. They accumulated. And at each stage, our ancestors were communicating with whatever capacity they had. More than a chimpanzee, less than a modern human, navigating their world with the tools available at the time. Between involuntary vocalization and full symbolic language, there is a strong argument that gesture played a central and underappreciated role. Modern research on language acquisition in children shows something interesting. Before children can speak, they point, they reach. They use their hands and bodies to communicate intention in ways that are clearly voluntary and clearly symbolic. The pointing gesture is particularly remarkable. It is almost uniquely human among primates. Wild chimpanzees do not spontaneously point to communicate with each other. The human drive to point at things, to direct another's attention towards something, is a foundational communicative act that almost certainly predates language. Some researchers have proposed that language itself evolved from gesture, that the first symbolic communication was manual rather than vocal, and that speech developed later, gradually taking over functions that hands had served. The evidence is suggestive. The neural circuits for gesture and speech overlap significantly. When people lose language through brain damage, gesture is often preserved. When people are prevented from gesturing, speech becomes harder. The two systems are deeply interconnected in ways that hint at a shared evolutionary origin. There is another communication channel easy to overlook from a modern perspective: touch. In non-human primates, social grooming, the physical act of picking through another animal's fur, occupies an enormous amount of daily time. In chimpanzees, it can account for up to 20% of the waking day. Grooming is not primarily about hygiene. It is primarily about relationship maintenance. It communicates alliance, affection, and social bonding in ways that are deeply meaningful to the animals involved. It releases endorphins. It reduces stress. It holds the social fabric of the group together. Our hominin ancestors almost certainly groomed. But as group sizes grew larger, a problem emerged. You can only groom one animal at a time. Maintaining bonds with an increasingly large social group through physical touch alone becomes mathematically impossible. Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist behind the concept of Dunbar's number, the approximate maximum human social group size of around 150, it argued that language may have evolved in part as a grooming substitute. Words allowed our ancestors to bond with multiple individuals simultaneously in a way that hands could not. You can talk to 3 people at once. You cannot groom 3 people at once. If Dunbar is right, one of the earliest functions of language was not to convey information about the world, but to maintain the social relationships that made group living possible. To groom with sound rather than touch. This would explain something that has always puzzled linguists about how humans actually use language. The majority of everyday conversation is not about facts or information. It is about relationships, about what other people are doing, feeling, and thinking. Small talk, in other words, may not be a trivial use of language. It may be what language was originally for. So, how did ancient humans communicate before language existed? With everything they had. With faces that could broadcast emotion in a fraction of a second. With bodies that told stories about status and intention without a single voluntary choice. With sounds that carried emotional truth before they carried meaning. With hands that pointed and gestured and touched in ways that built the social fabric of the group. And with minds that were already extraordinarily good at reading all of it. At receiving, interpreting, and responding to the constant stream of nonverbal information that every living primate generates simply by existing in the presence of others. Language did not replace all of this. It was added to it. You are still doing most of it right now. The expression that crosses your face before you have decided what you think. The posture shift that happens before you have formed a sentence. The instinctive read of another person's emotional state that occurs in under a second. All of that is ancient. Language is the newest tool in a kit that was built over millions of years. Everything else came first. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. I'll see you in the next one.